Shalom, welcome to Out of Africa Torah session. My name is Tatra Cohen, and this week we are on Parashat 38, and the name of this Parashat is Korach, which in English simply means Korah, and it's coming from the book of Numbers, chapter 16, from verse 1 all the way to 18, verse 32. I will read briefly from my complete Jewish Bible, which says, Now Korach, the son of Yitzhak, the son of Kehat, the son of Levi, along with Datan and Avram, the sons of Eliav, and On, the son of Pelet, descendants of Reuben, took men, rebelled against Moshe. Siding with them were 250 men of Israel, leaders of the community. Imagine there's a rebellion happening, and already 250 people have decided to go against Moses, the servant of Adonai. Interesting. And it continues. Allow me to read just a little bit more. It says 250 men of Israel, leaders of the community, key members of the council, men of reputation. They assembled themselves against Moshe and Aaron and said to them, You take too much on yourselves. After all, the entire community is holy. It seemed like this was a very good idea. Why are you having so much work on yourselves? You have taken too much for yourselves. After all of us are holy. Of course, they were right. The entire community had become holy. They had all heard the word of God from Mount Sinai. They heard the voice of God speaking to each one of them, from the great to the least. And it concludes on these few verses which I'm reading, which says, You take too much on yourselves. After all, the entire community is holy, every one of them, and Adonai is among them. So why do you lift yourselves up above Adonai's assembly? This was more like a confrontational statement. Why do you lift yourself? As if it was Moses' idea that he was lifting himself above Adonai's people or Adonai assembly. Firstly, when you look at this rebellion, it doesn't really look like rebellion. It looks like someone was trying to advise Moses and also to say, consider others. You know, this is the temptation we face mostly in our life today. You find you've got leaders, especially in the house of God. You may find, for example, the house of Moses, Aaron, the priest and his sons, they were serving in the Mishkan. You find Miriam also was involved in certain ministry work. And eventually Moses, of course, for them, they didn't have a problem with Moses because according to them, Moses was very qualified. Now, I like many interpretations which we find from this. Allow me to quote now what Onkelos say, according to his translation, the Hebrew reference that is. He says he separated himself from the rest of the community in order to maintain the dispute. We find this by the very opening words, which says Korach took. The word took there, it's telling us, according to Onkelos, that he separated himself. And this is exactly the temptation we find most ourselves getting into when you want to be the odd one out. You want to remove yourself from the community of God simply because you have an agenda. It could be a hidden agenda. But for them to be able to gather or to assemble men, leaders of the community who are in the number of 250, you can see that this was a lot of work already involved. Another interpretation which we see from the very words Korach took, that's what I'm dwelling now, Korach took. We see that this meant that he won over the heads of the Sanhedrin, among them with the flattering words. In other words, he went through flattering them, telling them nice, soothing words, so that he can separate them, and this group now turned against Moshe. So we see from the opening of these few verses that there was a lot of work already involved in these men beginning to turn against Moshe. If you allow me to look a little from verse 3, it also says, you have taken too much for yourselves. It looks like somebody who is saying, you are carrying so much burden. Can I help you with this? Can I help you with that? But their motive clearly shows that it wasn't to help. It was to do something that was later on regrettable by the entire community of Israel. So he says, you have taken too much for yourselves. You have taken much more distinction for yourselves than which is appropriate. It's like today you look at someone, he's the MP, he's also the minister, he's like you go in the house of God, you find you are the praise singer, you are the usher. You have taken too much for yourself. It looked like you want to help, but unfortunately the motive behind Korah and his colleagues was entirely not to help. So now we see another thing which they say is the entire community, we are all holy. Of course, this was in reference to the event which took place at Mount Sinai. Everybody had become holy, of course, because God had made himself appear to them, and his voice was heard to the entire congregation, to the entire assembly of people. So it looked like a good proposition which they were bringing. And finally they say, why do you raise yourself? If you took the monarch, it's like you have taken the kingdom, you are already royal household. But then why should you have chosen also the kehuna? Why do you give the high office also to your brother? Why do you give the kehuna to your brother Aaron? So you see clearly that from their sentiments, from these three things which they brought to Moses, the problem they had was not with Moses. The problem was with Aaron. They felt Aaron should not be in charge with the Mishkan work which God had given them. To them it was more like it's Moses who appointed his brother for them to have high offices, and they had a problem with that. Now, when you look at this, of course we are told that later on Moses, when he heard this, he fell on his face. Probably he was praying, trying to hear from God. And of course, eventually there was a miracle which made the earth open and these men died. Imagine you go before God, you say, okay, you are all criticizing. You go back before the people, you say, you are criticizing me. If I am the man of God, let fire come down. And eventually fire come down and devour them. And if I'm the man of God, let the earth open and you die in a very weird death. And it happens. It's like you've proven the point. I like the miraculous fact that it proved the point, but guess what? It did not give any solution. People died, but people continued to murmur. Some, they even started speaking against Moses. People who were not even part of these 250 men who rebelled. So they started speaking against Moshe and Aaron, saying, you have killed the men of God. Mind you, those who were rebellious are even called the men of God. So they started blaming Moshe, they started blaming Aaron and so forth. So you see later on Adonai sent the plague. In other words, we see that the miraculous intervention did not help. This is really what we face in our lives most of the times, especially among believers. We think if I can only have a miracle, most of my problems will disappear. And unfortunately, it was not in this case. The miracle did not help, did not change anything in what they were facing. It actually became worse because the plague had to come because people continued speaking against Moses. After Dathan, Korah and his colleagues, the sons of Reuben, had turned against Moshe. So what do we learn from that? We learn that, number one, the miracle did not end the rebellion. In other words, sometimes some of the challenges we face when we're just looking for a miracle, if I can just win lotto, if I can just do this, it's not really the solution. We should look for a permanent solution, that's something which God will do and that will clean the community of God. So we see again that at some point, each one of us in our lives, in our ministry, in our God-given mandate, we are prone to face rebellion at some point. And now it is up to us on how do we handle the rebellion that comes into our lives. But I like this, that Moses clearly got it from the beginning. that these people were not against Moses, they were against Aaron. They felt that Aaron was not qualified. This is where we hear later on that there was another thing which Adonai asked that Moses and Aaron should do, to take the sticks representing the tribes of Israel. And later on we see that the one which was representing the house of Aaron budded, and it was clear to everybody that Moses did not choose Aaron, but instead it's God who chose Aaron and his sons to save. And this is where the solution came to be. So the problem we see here was mainly with Moses taking things personal, whereby he went before God and said, if I'm called by God, let the earth open and you men be swallowed. Of course that happened, but that really wasn't what God wanted. The problem is Moses took this problem personally. When you face rebellion, when you face conflict, challenges, it's better not to take them personally. Even in the ministry, most of us who are serving God, don't take things personal. Just do your job and God will do the rest. And we see this temptation with Moses and Aaron continuously. And later on, Moses even came, and because he had a tendency of taking things personal, he went on further to say, do you want me and Aaron to feed you? And remember, when the people were thirsty, he ended up hitting the rock instead of speaking to the rock. Why? He kept taking the things personally. And this is our lesson today. Don't take anything personal. Never take the work of God personal. Just do your part and God does the best. And we see that this was the challenge with Moses, especially Moses in this particular event of rebellion. We face rebellion, we face challenges in life, but whatever come your way, never take it personal. Give it all to God, who has the best solution. Like in this case, God just simply said, okay, bring the sticks representing the tribes of Israel, the clans of Israel, and eventually the one which was set for Aaron budded, and people really realized themselves. It's not Moses who chose Aaron, it is actually God. And God proved that. So the solutions which come from God, they are permanent. But sometimes we hinder solutions from God because we end up taking our problems too personal.